How's everybody? Okay, so today we have, let me see, our 8th topic in this series, and I'm going to go into this topic on the power of intuition. Okay, so let me just start that. And this is something I've had a lot of fun with. There's a part of this topic that I've taught a lot, which is on creative thinking, which is one part of intuition. But this is going into it more as a fuller topic. So we've got our overall series, The Secret Powers of Meditation. This is the 8th of those, the power of intuition. So I want to start off by trying to get some clarity on what at least I mean by intuition. There seem to be a couple of main views on it, and there isn't actually full agreement. But I quite like this definition: the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning, and that comes from our old friend Google. So it's and then there's the whole debate about whether or not Google has intuition. And I have my doubts about that. But I want to start off with thinking about what kind of experiences come to mind when we think about intuition, maybe from your own experience or experiences or insights that you've heard about from other people. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So some people think of intuition as a way of understanding or a way of discovering some sort of new, some unknown knowledge. And quite a lot of scientists talk about intuition, how they discovered things through intuition rather than through any reasoning process. And one of the phenomena that's always fascinated me is that of people discovering things or inventing or creating things in dreams. So there's a famous example from Vasily Mendeleev, who was the chemist, one of the fathers of modern chemistry, really. He was the one who came up with the first version of the periodic table of elements. And he actually dreamed it. It actually came in a dream. He had the idea, but it was like he didn't quite see the last bit of how it all fitted together, and that became clear in his dream. So that's one kind of intuition where we get some insight. And I'd be curious to know if any of you know of other examples, similar examples like that. There are a couple that I know of, but there are quite a few, I think. I know another one, but I won't tell you in case you know it. You might want to guess it. But the other kind of intuitive dream that sometimes people have is where they create something new, rather than discovering something in the world of science or nature. They actually create something new, and probably the most famous is Paul McCartney dreaming a song, which became actually the most recorded song in history. And it came to him in a dream, ready-made. Well, he had the tune, but he changed the lyrics with the help of John Lennon. But does anyone happen to know what that song is? It's a fairly early one from the Beatles, but it's really well known. If you've heard of the Beatles, you know this song. Let's see here. How good are we? Okay. Well, one of you got it right. And one of you mentioned a song that's not written by Paul McCartney. It's by John Lennon in his solo career. Imagine. One of my favorite songs. I actually like that song better. But yes, you're right, Harry. It's yesterday. So Paul woke up one morning and he's wondering where he heard that. He felt like it. He describes it. He says, I thought it was by somebody else. He said, I thought I'd heard it before. It seemed so familiar, but it was completely original. And so he came up with this song, and it was one of their big hits. And it was a song that John Lennon much later wrote a very nasty lyric about when they were fighting. And he said, you haven't written any decent songs since yesterday. So of course, clever John, always playing on words. But even he, there was a period when they were in conflict, and even he acknowledged that this was really a great song. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I want to know if any of you have ever had any sort of realization? You don't, I'm not saying you don't have to have sort of invented the universe, but any sort of insight or realization that's come to you in a dream? Telepathic experience is another one, which I'm going to talk about in a minute from my personal experience. That's another one. Has any of you ever experienced some degree of what you really felt was telepathy? Either with a human or maybe with some kind of animal, because there are many examples. It's actually very common of some sort of telepathic connection between animals and humans. But I'm just curious to know if any of you have experienced that. Okay, if you haven't experienced it, maybe have you heard of it or come across any instances or cases of that you found curious? Wondered about it? Do you think it's possible? So you're going to tell us? Gene, you can turn your mic on. Gene, are you? You've got. I think you've got your mic on, but I can hear you typing. You can just talk to us. Okay, you're working along there, Nez, and I can't bear the suspense. While you're doing that, I'll tell you a couple of things that happened to me. And this was just interesting. It was, I mean, I've had lots of little experiences like this, but a couple that really stand out was when I was about 18, maybe 19. Oh my God. You encountered a wolf? I didn't know that wolves in Van Ness leave out a truck and sat next to a wolf. But okay, the wolf is your totem. That's pretty cool. Okay, I like it. I wouldn't be shy about that. I think that's impressive. That's so cool. It was 90 times it's a wolf. Okay, so it was a kind of tame wolf, kind of mostly. Yeah. Well, dogs are kind of toned down wolves, aren't they? Wow, very interesting. Mine was with a human. When I was about 18, 19, I had a very close friend, and we really loved the same music. And I remember there would be often times when he would start humming a particular tune, and it would be exactly the tune that was going through my mind at the time. This happened frequently with the two of us. So that was an interesting kind of alignment. Okay, Nikola Tesla, he used intuition to make original scientific discoveries. Srinivas Ramanujan was an Indian mathematician with tremendous original insights into mathematics. He had no use for mathematics that did not relate to his concept of the divine. So, yeah, there are definitely quite a lot of scientists who have these sort of, use their intuition, or they come up with things through dreams. Okay, you get. Oh, your writers group, you have telepathic stuff happening. That's cool. Yeah, people who are close and doing something similar, they often that happens more frequently. That's pretty neat. I had a very dramatic one again when I was a bit younger. I must have been 16 or 17. I think I was 16. And yeah, I was 16, and I had a very close friend, different guy, and I moved to a different city. So I was living in Wellington in New Zealand, and my family moved to Auckland. And in New Zealand in those days, we could get our driver's license when we were 15. So me and my friends and I, we were driving our parents' cars around pretty fast. And so when I got to the new city, Auckland, it's 500 miles away. After I'd been there a couple of weeks, I think, I had this dream about my friend Matthew, and I dreamed that he was driving his mother's car, I think it was, or his father's car, one of their cars, and he had an accident on this road that I was very familiar with. And the next morning, I got a call and he had an accident there, but he was okay. Nobody was hurt, but the car was written off. But it was really weird because everything about the dream was it was exactly the corner where he had the accident. It was completely vivid. It was all correct, but they have two cars, and I had the wrong car. So that was, I'm going to use that as an example of something I'll show you a bit later about how this works. So some degree of telepathy is actually quite a regular experience for a lot of people. Well, yeah, that's a good comment, Harry. You had more inaccurate telepathic insights than accurate ones, but we tend to remember the accurate ones. Yeah, it's a bit like people who play the stock market. They remember all their wins and forget all the losers and pretend to their wives that they're not losing money. Okay, so we're going to look at a little bit of what happened there. There's a famous, well, I know this is a fictional story. This is from Lord of the Rings. But there's the great intuition that Gandalf had was that Gollum had a role to play. And he said, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, even the wise, they don't know the outcome of all things. But he just had this feeling that it was important to save Gollum, even though he was this really kind of horrible, evil creature and he had murdered people and he was really dangerous. But Gandalf was absolutely right. Gollum was the one who actually destroyed the ring and defeated the Lord of the Rings. So I know I thought that was a neat example of creative use of an intuition in storytelling. Does this include when you suddenly change direction while you're walking? I've no idea. I need more detail. I'm not quite. I don't know what I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Gene. But let's have a look at this from some other. So Einstein is famous for talking about intuition as instrumental in his process of discovery. There's no logical way to the discovery of these elemental laws. There's only the way of intuition, which is helped by a feeling for the order lying behind the appearance. So here is actually a combination of his rational understanding, right? He's talking of not just a rational understanding, but his connection with, he was exploring the nature of light and matter and the fundamental laws that govern these. So he had a feeling for it, but then he got these sort of breakthroughs through his imaginative visualizations and exercises. That was a big part of his method. He actually visualized himself riding on a light beam. That was one of his what he called his mind experiments or something, and tried to use that to try and understand what would happen. Okay, I want you to guess who this quote is from. I'm one of the few people who understands how producing technology requires intuition and creativity, and producing something artistic takes real discipline. And you've definitely heard of this person. So I want to see if you can guess who this is from. Because he was known for this combining aesthetics and technology and invention. And let's see if we get an accurate guess. Very good. Yeah, it's spot on. This guy. So, he used that combination of essentially intellect and sort of the rational thinking and that is a part of the development of any technology, of course. But he combined that with intuition, and he deliberately hired people who weren't just technical and weren't just analytical. He deliberately sought out people who were into creative writing and poetry and stuff like that. And he saw intuition as instrumental in the development of the famous Apple products. Now, I believe, the most valuable company in the world. So that's I thought it was an interesting perspective, and I love this one. The only really real valuable thing is intuition. So this is Einstein's claim. Okay, so I want to try and clear up a few issues around this, because there are a lot of ideas people have about intuition that I think they sort of muddy the water. They confuse things. So people sometimes say, well, I go with my gut feeling rather than my reason, or they use the words instinct and intuition interchangeably. And there's another term, learned intuition, which is used it's kind of in psychology. I've seen people talking about it, and I want to distinguish between that and what I would argue is the traditional understanding of intuition. And there's something else called pranendria, which is kind of like the sixth sense, which is also, all these things are confused with intuition. So let's start with, well, firstly, emotion. Emotion is emotion. It's not the same thing as intuition. It's actually, it's kind of, it originates, emotions originate from our glandular system and our chakras, and to a very minor extent, our nervous system. But they're not at all the same thing as intuition. Don't let your cowboys grow up to be babies. Let them be artists and monks. And such. Is that a quote from somebody, or is that from you? That's kind of funny. Krishnendu's remark was entertaining. Yeah, a lot of people, yeah, they confuse their emotion or gut feeling with intuition, and this is often because they feel they want to say this is very common when people fall in love, right? And they think it's their intuition, but actually it's just that it's their emotion, and it may or may not be misleading them, but it may be a very transitory thing rather than some deep insight. Oh, you're a Willie Nelson song. I don't know the song, but I think it sounds awesome. Good old Willie Nelson, brilliant songwriter. Yeah. Instinct is another one. So instincts these are our survival drives, if you like. There are four main instincts, which are the instinct to find food. So there are Sanskrit names for all of this. This is all part of basic yoga psychology. We have desire for food, for sleep. We have the fear instinct, and we have the sexual or procreative instinct. And each of these, it gets complicated in humans because we have a whole lot of other drives as well, on sort of a higher, you could say, more subtle drives. But the instincts are not the same thing as intuition at all. But a lot of people, as I said, use the terms interchangeably. It's completely confusing. Learned intuition. Anyone know what learned intuition is? What it's referring to? Okay, it is Willie Nelson. You guys are stuck on Willie Nelson. Not a bad place to be stuck. Yeah, who knows what learned intuition is? What this refers to, or the context, the most common context. Actually, not. It's actually a really good guess. Muscle memory. No, muscle memory is exactly what it's describing. It literally is your nervous system having memory, remembering movements and habits. And as a guitarist, this is the only way we can function. You can't, and even typing on a keyboard, you couldn't do that without muscle memory. No, that's not what they mean by learned intuition. Learned intuition is nowadays often used in the context of deep learning or artificial intelligence. And they talk about, there's lots of conversations about artificial intelligence developing intuition. By the definition of intuition that I understand, this is probably not possible. What they're talking about is vast amounts of data. Well, let's go back to human beings. In human beings, when they talk about learned intuition, what they're saying is, for example, I saw an example recently. There were some soldiers who had been in Iraq for a period, like repeated tours in Iraq. Now, this is a very difficult and dangerous situation, and I'm not going to go into the politics of it. Just, you can imagine a soldier there, and they're in an environment which is extremely hostile. And there are frequent instances of people planting bombs and so on and so forth. And what they develop what they find is after working in that environment and being sort of operating in that environment repeatedly for maybe several years, they can look at a street and just kind of know in a really uncanny way that there may be a bomb there, or there may be some sort of incendiary device there. And it's really strange. And they don't know how they do it, but they're incredibly accurate. Now, they call this learned intuition, but actually it's not. It's based on data. It's just that we sense many things. We get all kinds of signals coming in through our senses, but we're only conscious of a fraction of them. Okay, now we're talking about the Aikido master. That's something else. That's pranendriya. Learned intuition is based on data, but it's data that's invisible to our minds because it's all subconscious. We see stuff and we remember it without even realizing we remember it. So we've got all of this data and we're only conscious of a tiny fraction of it. And then we make these, they call them intuitive leaps, but it's all based on information that we actually have. That is not pure intuition. That is actually reasoning based on massive amounts of data, which is why, of course, it converts very easily to the artificial intelligence world, which is, when the deep, what's it called? Deep Blue? No, that was the one that the IBM one. There was a supercomputer using AI that finally beat a human being in the Chinese board game of Go. Now, computers became better than humans at chess long ago. I think 1997, basically humans were out of the game. The last world, grandmaster surrendered completely. I mean, after being beaten many times. Now, no human can beat a computer at chess. That's been the case for more than 20 years. But Go is a far more complex game. There are literally, I think, like trillions of possible moves. And some British company came up with a computer that like 10 years earlier than they expected it, who could beat the world Go champion. And now it's not possible for, that was several years ago. And now computers are ahead of us at that. But that's all based on computation of possibilities or considering possibilities. A computer can't make stuff up. It puts data together and information together, and it learns, and it gets better and better very rapidly because it can test and try things at at a rate that we can't even conceive of. But it's not the same as intuition. Intuition, as defined earlier, it's a direct knowing. And what makes it possible is none of these things, not emotion, it's not instinct, it's not a vast amount of data. And it's not this sixth sense. I've got to get into good questions here. I'll come back to the minute. It's not the sixth sense, which is known as pranendriya in yoga. But that's what we're talking about with something like an Aikido master. There's famous stories like a blind Tai Chi or Aikido, really adepts who can even fight blind. They are sensing the other person through a kind of a physical senses. They can feel the energy of the other person up to a certain distance. And it's not actually intuition. I'll explain a little bit about it in a moment. Here we go. We're going into pranendriya now. So pranendriya is this kind of sixth sense. It's actually more physical than mental. It's linked to the what it's called prana. Prana is the life force that flows through the nadis, or the meridians, as they call them in Chinese. In the little diagram there, you can see the three main nadis flowing directly along inside the spine and crisscrossing the spine and forming the chakras. So that's the main flows of the prana energy in the body, all right? In a Chinese medical diagram, you'll usually see a whole lot of other channels connecting different parts of the body. Those are the minor meridians, or the minor nadis, but they're also where the prana or vital energy flows, right? Now we're able to sense this vital energy from the heart chakra. And indriya, so prana means vital energy. Indriya means sense, like we have the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, etc. But this is like a sixth sense. So it's the prana sense. And it enables us to feel something about a person, whether we should trust them or not. And animals have it. That's why, Dogs, for example, if famous, if there's somebody untrustworthy who has some bad intent, dogs are very good at picking that up. Animals are really good at sensing certain things to do with energy of people and other animals, whether they're hostile or not. Some of it is pheromones, because dogs have an amazing sense of smell, but some of it is them sensing the energy. But it's different than intuition in a number of ways. Firstly, it's kind of more physical than mental. It's limited in range, so it doesn't work over a long distance. Whereas telepathy, for example, can work over very long distances, like thousands of miles. I've experienced that frequently, and there's been experiments on that verifying that. So it's limited in range. Animals also share it. Animals also do experience telepathy over distance. So it's not and that is a function of intuition. So it's not that true intuition is not exclusively the realm of humans, though the higher manifestations of it are. There's a professor from England, Cambridge University, Rupert Sheldrake. He's done tons of research into this, and he's actually created a series of experiments that you can try yourself to test pranayendra. He calls it, he has another name. He's got his own terminology. I don't think he uses the term intuition, certainly doesn't talk about pranayendra, though he has studied yoga and meditation quite deeply. But he talks about it, and he has these really good experiments in animal telepathy where dogs know when the master or mistress is coming home. That's been proven thousands of times. And some other really cool, simple ways of testing this. One of them is the sense of being looked at. And this is something I've actually done that in groups. If we were in a room together, I would actually have you lined up and we'd be testing if somebody, one of you would be one end of the room and we'll test if they know when everybody's looking at them. And that's really simple and it's fun. And it's kind of crazy. And we did it one time, and first we got people to tell us whether they thought they had a kind of good sixth sense or not. And then we actually tested it, and people turned out to be really wrong. So there's a lot of self-delusion around this stuff. Believe me, I tell you some funny stories about that. Pranayendra is extremely useful in medical diagnosis. This is one of the agencies that's being employed, probably unconsciously, by a Chinese doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor when they take your pulse, and they can tell you all kind of stuff about your body. Or there are different simple tests they do. I had medical diagnosis from some amazing, they'd call them intuitive doctors, but actually they're mostly using pranayendra. It's a bit of a mix of intuition and pranayendra and information. I mean, they blend, right? Because they also have a lot of knowledge. But this is not the same as intuition in the pure sense. So what I want to explain now from the perspective through the lens of yoga philosophy is what intuition actually is. So it's a function of the 3 higher levels of the mind. Now, maybe you weren't even aware that you have 3 higher levels of mind. So we're going to look at the model of the mind according to yoga in relation to all of this stuff, all right? So this is, the theory of koshas. Koshas means layers. So they're considered to be 5 layers of the mind in yoga philosophy, and a 6th layer would be the physical body itself. And they are layers often starting off, we start with the physical body, and then the next level is the kind of most closely connected to the physical, and it deals with sensing, desiring, and acting. So it's kind of like the interface between the senses and the mind. And it's a bit basically like a dog. Okay, so dogs are good. Dogs, they sense stuff, and then they see the bone, they feel the desire for the bone, they go and they bite the bone. Okay, there's a part of our minds that does that. And it's not just that we desire things like food, like a dog. We might desire, a child goes into an Apple store, and the Apple store is designed to lure the child and get the child to sense the pretty new iPhone and desire the iPhone and bug, her mum to buy her one. So we have more complex desires than a dog, but this part of our minds is essentially functions on the more instinctive level, and certainly on just this level of sensing and going through, picking up the information, responding to the information coming through the senses, and then acting on that. So that's the basic, and it's kind of parallel to the conscious mind as termed in Western psychology, similar. So think of it as, it's kind of like the conscious mind. Then there's the next level. It's the memory, where we process information, we store information, and this is like our inner robot, our inner computer. Actually, it's very similar to a computer, because a computer remembers stuff, okay? And it reorganizes that information, and it can process information, and it can run programs. Our manomaya kosha, it's called in Sanskrit, these are very much the sort of functions that it performs. And we just call it our reasoning mind, our rational mind. And it's kind of subconscious, because a lot of those processes, we're not aware of them. If I ask you, what's, I don't know, 6 times 3, you'll just pull it out of your memory like that. You don't have some conscious process that you go through, look through your memory like a filing system and drag it up from your, early school years, and you say, okay, it's 18. You just sort of, it's there, and that's a subconscious process. So that's just a memory recall. But if you're actually given a complex problem that requires reasoning, that also happens subconsciously in this sort of in the background. So this is a subconscious process. The sensing and desiring and acting is mostly conscious. That's on the surface, and you're aware of it. The memory and reasoning is in the background. Now we begin to get into the realms of intuition. So the first is creativity, where we come up with ideas, imagination. We fantasize about stuff, we dream up things. A lot of dreaming goes on here. Dreaming goes on in both the memory, because a lot of dreams can involve memories, but also we have creative dreams, and the seeds of the personality are in the same level. And it's a little bit where I've got, might recognize this artist. I used him to represent the brilliant, creative, imaginative, but also maybe personal idiosyncrasies come up here, right? The personality is very varied and complex. Whoops, I did that wrong. Well, there we go. And the next one. This is the next level of mind. It's where you can think of the wise sage, right? Where we actually develop wisdom. The conscience originates here, our innate sense of right and wrong, our ability to feel detached from things that really don't matter, and and to let go of the sort of emotional clinging on is an ability that comes as we develop this level of the fourth level of the mind. And the fifth level is where awareness originates, and that is also a kind of intuition. So all of these, top 3, they're different types of intuition: creative thinking, wisdom and insight. This is where the scientific discoveries come from. And awareness, which is where the most fundamental intuition of all is, the awareness that we exist and that we know we exist. And this is where consciousness comes from, and where we're directing our meditation efforts ultimately. So that's the model of the mind in yoga philosophy. Okay, so intuition is these 3: creativity, wisdom, and awareness, right? Now, there are a lot of there's more confusion. Here's another area of confusion. Things around mind reading, clairvoyance, Nostradamus, prophecy. I tell you a couple of experiences that entertain me here. So, I've talked about some experiences I've had of telepathy, and a little bit of a clairvoyant dream where my friend had a car accident and all that. And this is not that rare. Not everybody has these experiences, but it's not that uncommon. I was hitchhiking long ago in Australia, and a truck driver picked me up. And it's funny, sometimes I find, and this is, other people have this similar experience. Sometimes I find that when I meet a complete stranger and I'm with them for a while, I'm in the guy's truck for a few hours, because I'm a stranger, and he sort of realized that I'm sort of into sort of a little bit weird stuff. He felt comfortable telling me things, telling me something he'd never told anybody else, not even his wife. He told me of an experience he had when he was driving his truck. He fell asleep at the wheel, and the truck went off the road, and he woke up and the truck is on its side, but he suddenly found himself watching it from above. And he could see himself in the driver's seat, see the truck sliding to a halt. Luckily, he wasn't badly hurled. He was very shaken, but he's able to see it from above, and he could see down the road some distance. It was nighttime. Down the road some distance, there was a farmhouse with lights on. And then he found himself back in his body in the truck, and he was kind of shaken and freaked out, and he thought, what am I going to do? And then he remembered, oh, there's a house down the road, but he couldn't see it from where he was. And this is how he knew that he went and he walked down the road, and there was the house, and the people helped him, and things were okay. But he said this was, he had never experienced anything like that. He didn't really believe in anything like that, but he had this out of body experience, and he'd never told anybody, because, you know, the truck driving subculture is not, they're going to make fun of you like a lot. They're going to think you're crazy. And that's why he couldn't tell anyone, but he could tell me because I'm a stranger. And he was a really nice guy. We got on well. So anyway, my point is that all sorts of people anyone can have this kind of experience, but not all of them are authentic. So I had a meditation student in Melbourne in Australia, and I remember her name was Tina or something, and she was sincere. She liked her meditation, but she had found another teacher who was a psychic, and she was telling about this woman and thought I would be interested. I was actually not that interested. I was skeptical about this woman, but I couldn't say anything because I couldn't, you know, wouldn't have been, she wouldn't have understood. So she actually introduced me to this woman, this psychic. We were at an esoteric fair where there were all these stands with things, you know, there were some meditation things and astrology and I don't know, all kind of tarot and all different things. She introduced me to this lady, and she was had a big purple, all in purple robe, and she had a kind of a scepter or a kind of wand, like a 5-foot tall wand with a big crystal on top, and she was really dressed for the part. And she had another student with her, and she met me, and talk of pranindriya, I didn't have a good feeling about her. I got this feeling that she was really egotistical. You know, you can sometimes sense that in a person. But anyway, I was polite. My mother taught me to be polite. And she said, oh, how are you? And I said, nice to meet you. Tina told me a lot about you. And then she says, yes. She says, and she said, I know what you're thinking. And I thought, oh, this is really weird. I said, really? I said, oh, that's so interesting. So you're saying you know what I'm thinking right now? She said, yes, of course. Like, I'm a psychic. I know what you're thinking. I said, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me what it is then? I just wanted, I'm really curious. I'd like to check. And so she was caught. She had to say, and of course she didn't know what I was thinking. She said something completely different I'd probably never thought of in my entire life. And so she said, I don't remember what it was. And I just laughed. And I said, that's absurd. I'd never thought about that. And she insisted. Now she kind of was caught in her own web, if you like, web of deceit. And she insisted that she knew what I was thinking, and it was just nonsensical. So I later had another opportunity to interact with this strange lady. I was somehow invited to speak at her center. She had some kind of center where people go for psychic readings and classes on whatever, her thing. And I was invited there, but not by her, because I think she probably didn't like me. But one of her students invited me somehow. So I ended up giving a class there, and I finished, people seem to like it, whatever. And I came out, I looked at the notice board, and there was a sign saying psychic readings, $30. And then it had in brackets, discount for students, $20. Please bring student ID. And then I I couldn't stop. I was really having trouble stopping laughing because I was thinking, what kind of psychic is she if she doesn't know if they're a real student or not and has to see their ID? And I just thought this woman is such a fraud. So there are those, and there's a lot of them. And there are some people who are genuinely psychic and clairvoyant. And then there's people, historically famous people like Edgar Cayce or Nostradamus. But one of you mentioned that you have these telepathic, what kind of experiences? Some of them, and they're often wrong. I think that was you, Harry. Intuitive errors. Okay. What causes so many intuitive errors? Oh yeah, finding missing persons. That's a real thing. This is used by the police, even the FBI, to find missing people, or probably dark stuff we don't know about. The Russians did a lot of research into distant, sort of trying to find out secrets from the enemy and all that kind of stuff. There's been a lot of research into that from, particularly by the Russians, back in the 60s and 70s, and it may be continuing. We don't know. But yeah, this is a real thing in some cases. The people that make a lot of noise about it and claim for it and claim big things and that, they often are the frauds because they're making a lot of noise so they can get paid and make some money, I think. But there are some legitimate people who can have these amazing intuitive powers to know, mysterious things at a distance. The woman was hit by lightning. Oh my God. Oh, and that was what awoke this thing, or was that afterwards? That's pretty curious. So I've interesting thing about Nostradamus. You've heard of, Nostradamus was this famous French astrologer, lived about 400 years ago. And he wrote all these prophecies about the future. And he's very, very famous. Obviously, she became psychic after being hit by lightning. Okay. Well, there you go. There's, if you want to try it, I don't suggest it. Nostradamus, in his writings, he mentioned even the name, almost got the name of Hitler right. He talked about what looks like he was predicting the assassination of the Kennedy brothers and some major historical events. So he's really kind of famous and considered like this incredible prophet for making such specific, almost dead right kind of prophecies. So I thought that's pretty interesting. So I read a book of his prophecies. So I read this book in like 2001, I think. The book was written in 1970. And it was his prophecies, or somebody interpreting his prophecies, for the last 30 years of the 20th century, from 1970, would have been a bit later, maybe 75, I read it. The last 20 years of the 20th century. I read this whole book and I thought it was fascinating. And the lady that wrote it was a scholar of Old French, and she went into great detail about interpreting it correctly. And I thought it was amazing. I read the whole book. And the thing that really blew my mind was that every single one of those prophecies was completely wrong. So even Nostradamus was usually wrong. But he was occasionally right. So that tells us something about this kind of intuition. It gets mixed. The data gets mixed with your own stuff from your lower levels of your mind. And that's why I dreamed about my friend having the car accident, but it was the wrong car, right? And it's very difficult to sort out what is really intuition and what is just stuff from your own mind, things you desire, things you would like to happen. And of course, a good astrologer does require intuition as well as information. But prophecy is a very uncertain, I always say that prophecy is an art best practiced with the benefit of hindsight, which was why a lot of people, they would go and interpret Nostradamus sort of after the fact and say, oh, look, he was talking about that. Wow, that's amazing, you know. So that's kind of easier once the things have already happened and you know what eventuated. I have a theory. Oh, I've got to show you one of my favorite pictures, and we saw this last week. Oh, ego. Well, that's enough. Well, let me talk about that. One of the reasons, the main reason actually, that many spiritual teachers and masters, including my guru Anandamurti, and including a lot of the great sort of Buddhist gurus and teachers, they warn against deliberately trying to develop these sort of intuitive powers like clairvoyance and mind reading and these kind of extraordinary powers, psychic powers, you can say. They warn against it. They say this is actually very dangerous for several reasons. One is that it very easily inflates the ego. And I mentioned the lady who the purple wand, who purple dress or whatever. She had this, firstly, she was deluding herself to a significant degree. She was not as psychic as she thought she was. She might have been a little bit psychic, but she didn't know what I was thinking, claimed she did, so she lied, or maybe she was just deluded. But she wasn't even able to tell whether somebody was really a student or not. I mean, I think she was mostly a fraud, but she might have had a little bit of psychic power. But one thing was clear, she had a huge ego. And this is the biggest obstacle on the spiritual path. And I've met a number of people like that who are into this healing. Just about everybody I know who claims they have healing power, most of whom don't, almost all of them have huge egos about it. And this is very detrimental spiritually. So that's one of the major reasons why, many of the genuine spiritual teachers and gurus, they warn against pursuing this. Another one is that it's a misdirection of energy. You can spend a lot of mental energy trying to develop these things instead of actually developing your self-awareness and moving towards enlightenment. So it's actually seen as a departure from the path of spiritual practice, pursuing this kind of power. It's like you're choosing power over love, effectively, and it's really discouraged. And so this is my favorite prophecy. These signs appeared all around where I live and all over America, I think, in prior to, as you might have guessed, prior to May the 21st, 2011. And I just love it. These poor people spent all this money on these billboards all over the country, and suddenly nothing happened. But I have my own sort of theory about predicting the future. I really feel that predicting, particularly the end of the world, is a lose-lose proposition. There is no possible upside. Think of it like this: if you predict the end of the world, and you're right, nobody will ever know. Because the world has ended, everyone's dead. So you never get any benefit from being right. If you predict the end of the world and you're wrong, you look like this guy who made up this stupid thing and everybody understood that he was a fraud. So, it's really not a good idea to, in my opinion, to go into this field of professional field of predicting the end of the world, because you literally cannot win or benefit in any way. So I don't suggest it. Okay, one of my last thing I've been really, Einstein's gotten his more than his fair share. Oh, this is interesting. The lady that found the missing persons didn't like her new insights. They were very stressful. Yeah, I can imagine. It's and this is something that a lot of people experience. The ones that don't have a lot of ego, they actually find it very difficult. The process of tapping into this kind of intuition or psychic thing, it's very draining. It drains your energy, and it's not necessarily a pleasant thing. It doesn't make you happy. So I really don't think it's such a wonderful thing. This is one of my favorite Einstein quotes, and it said he's getting more than his fair share of screen time, but he just came up with great stuff. I mean, apart from unearthing the secrets of the universe, he also said some really, really insightful things about intuition. And I love this one. I think 99 times and get nothing. I stop thinking and let my mind swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. And yeah, he's talking about meditation. I actually created a kind of a meditation. I call it my Einstein meditation, based on this quote. I've recorded it. I'm gonna put it in our meditation app sometime. Authentic healers are trained under strict guidance. A few you know. Okay. Are you talking about psychic healers, Gene? I mean, there's all kind of healers. Okay. Now I'm going to just explain how we've got these layers of the mind, 5 layers of the mind. You might remember you got a dog, a robot, a crazy artist, a wise sage, and an illuminated saint. All right. Oh, you're talking about spiritual healers. Okay. Yeah, I'm to be honest, I'm not, I'm wary of the entire field, whether they're trained under a strict guidance or not. I've never seen it really in the long run bring benefit. I've seen it bring a lot of harm to people. I'm very wary of it. So this is the process, the eightfold path of Ashtanga yoga. Asta means 8. We'll get it. This is in Sanskrit. We're going to the English. 8-limbed yoga. Here we go. And it starts with these ethical principles. Don't be evil, do be good. That's a real oversimplification. But anyway, the yoga postures, asanas, you're probably familiar with, breathing or pranayama, breathing exercises. And we go to the other 4. We'll start from the top, withdrawing the mind through focusing. If you've actually been initiated into an Andhamaga meditation and you have the first lesson, this is the first part of the first lesson. It's a visualization, a couple of visualizations to help you withdraw your attention from the world and from the body and bring your concentration to a point, which is the next one. This is also known as dharana in Sanskrit. And then with the mantra and the idea, the spiritual idea of infinite love connected with the mantra, use that as a focus in your meditation. And then the last stage of this is the experience of samadhi, or where the mind is suspended and we just merge into consciousness. And that is usually a temporary experience, and there are different levels of that. So this is this whole system of Ashtanga yoga. And the octopus is there because it's got 8 limbs, and this yoga has 8 limbs, and I like octopuses. So that's my reasoning. Okay, now this whole system it plugs into these layers of the mind. Very specifically, it's actually designed to develop all of these layers of the mind. So the yoga postures or asanas are primarily good for the physical body, right? They tune up your body and your nervous system and your glandular system so that you've got your bodies in good shape to meditate. The ethical principles known as jama and niyama, they really help us to control our crazy urges, and that's pretty important. And they stop us doing things that we feel regret later, and getting angry and hitting somebody without thinking, and just we need to rein in our instincts and regulate our behavior if we want to function as a kind of person we want to be. Regulated breathing really helps the subconscious mind and calms down it slows down your thinking, actually, and it can be very powerful if it's done in the right way. The withdrawal methods, and there are several of them, they really help us to connect or develop the creative power. Concentration helps to develop stillness and deep wisdom and insight. And spiritual meditation, where we expand our sense of awareness, connects us to the source of love within ourselves. So this is really designed to develop the whole self, including all these layers of intuition, but it's designed to do it in a way that's very holistic, if you like. It's very balanced. We don't sort of get all obsessed with some sort of minor psychic insight and think that's the spiritual path. It's not. It's a side effect and a distraction from the actual spiritual path. So this whole system is designed to help us to evolve fully and not to get sidetracked. Having said that, I've found through my meditation that it's certainly helped me with my own creative work as a musician and a writer, and it's helped me to understand things more deeply. So it does bring a measure of wisdom and insight and so forth, but it's done in a balanced way. Dr. Ji Gang Shah, I don't know who that is, but I gather you are sometimes a fan, at least in moments. Thanks, Jean. So there you go. Just a couple of last questions. One is, are we human beings, as we are now with our, modern lifestyle, you could say, are we, some people would argue that we're actually becoming less intuitive. So that's one thought. Another one is whether or not artificial intelligence can develop intuition. Well, I've already made some comment about that. It depends what kind of what use of the term you're talking about. But my understanding is that yes, if you're talking about learned intuition, which is not really intuition, yes, artificial intelligence, that's what it is. It depends on that, and it does do amazing things, but it's not what I understand by the term intuition, and it's not what is understood traditionally. If you look at the history of the topic, this idea of learned intuition is very new, and it's a departure from the sort of understanding. I mean, there are people talked about this back, people like Aristotle and Plato were talking about this. There is an established idea of intuition, which is not learned intuition. So the short answer to can AI develop intuition? No. Are we becoming less intuitive? Well, maybe. You see, there has been a lot of research into things like telepathy, sensing water, like divining water, amongst indigenous people. And they are way better at it than people that live in cities, people that work in front of computers. Yeah, you're right onto it, Advaita. Advaita's saying, I think we're getting more distracted and not paying as much attention to intuition. Yeah. Well, for example, in Australia, the tribal people there, the Aboriginals or the Koori people, there are many tribes of them. It was very common for them to communicate telepathically, when they were living more simply in their traditional lifestyle. They're nomadic. They had a very simple lifestyle. They weren't even settled. They hadn't even had their agricultural revolution. But they were very intuitive. They were really, really connected telepathically over great distances. They were experts at divining water, sensing water. And this is, I think, probably a function of pranendriya rather than intuition, or maybe a combination. But they live in a dry country, and they had these subtle extensions of their regular senses that help them to survive. But and the same has been found amongst, again, the tribal peoples in the Amazon and so forth. But generally speaking, modern humans, it's like we've suppressed or forgotten or lost most of these capacities because we're using our intellect all the time, and it's drowning out the more subtle signals. It's like it's dominating, and we these other not other senses, but these other faculties, we're not exercising them. So our lifestyle is interfering with our intuitive abilities. Yeah, you could argue that moving us from our intuitive abilities suits the goals and purposes of our economic system. Yeah, I mean, not just the economic system, the educational system was designed to train people to work in factories. That's actually the basis of to do boring things repetitively. that is no longer very useful, because the machines are beginning to do that, actually, especially artificial intelligence. And we need to be educated to use our intuition so that we can actually create new things as human beings. So both the economic system and the educational system are outmoded beyond their use, their useful lives. I would tend to agree. We stop trusting our intuition. I think that's, well, it's because we're confused about it, right? Because most people are confused about the difference between intuition and desire and instinct and pranindriya as well. That doesn't really matter that much. So if you don't know if it is real intuition, then it's difficult. I do have a recommendation here, though. If you have some feeling that you think might be an important intuitional insight, or I should do this, I should follow this course, I should get this, apply for this new job, or I should undertake this new enterprise, or whatever it is, it may or may not be intuition. Okay. And what I tend to do is actually test it. I test it with rationality. And my criteria is like this: if it makes sense, okay, in terms of my values, firstly, which is actually a combination of rationality and intuition. If it makes sense in terms of my values, it makes sense in terms of my goals, and it might actually work, if it's a reasonable idea, and I have this feeling of intuition for it, if I'm drawn to it, then I'd say, yeah, that it's sort of passed both tests. So I really think we need to combine our rationality, which is very developed, but it has limited powers, with our intuition, which is we don't have as much access to, and it's unclear sometimes. But if it's really perfect, if it was functioning fully, it would be a much more effective and powerful tool than our intellect. But the problem is we have a developed intellect, typically, a less developed intuition. So we need to use both. And if they agree, then that's a really good test. So that's what I advise people. Okay, is intuition affected by sensory errors, cognitive errors, biases, prejudices, logic errors, ego, biochemical, hormonal imbalance, etc.? No, that's all. Well, pure intuition is doesn't make mistakes. Basically, it is an insight. The problem is all of that stuff what you're talking about confuses the signal. So yes, by the time it gets to our conscious mind, and it's picked up all of this interference, especially biases and things like that, it becomes very difficult to know what is the original intuition and what's not. So yes, it messes up our access to the intuition. If we had perfect access to intuition, we would have wouldn't have so many problems. But all of these other issues mess it up. That's true. So part of yoga is to minimize that, right? That's why we do. Oh, some of my favorite music you're reminding me of. That's why we practice yoga postures, why we follow a pure diet, why we try and lead a lifestyle that minimizes, biochemical and hormonal imbalances for a start. Even, we want to minimize unconscious bias and all of these things. Reminding us, Tommy, the story of Tommy by The Who, an amazing piece of music. Yeah, he was an intuitive, deaf, dumb, and blind boy. Interesting. So we're just drawing to a close here. Those are my last couple of questions. This really messes up intuition, addiction to screens. Whoops, going back to that. Yeah. Actually, this addiction to screens and social media particularly is currently the leading cause of depression and anxiety and even suicide. It's incredibly destructive, especially affecting young people who've grown up with it. It's designed to hook them, and it's very important to control that. I've got a really great book I'm reading on that. It's called Digital minimalism. I'm going to write that in the link, the chat for you in a minute. Okay, well, I already talked about that. Oh, I'm going to, this is just to tease you. This is an amazing, very short video. It's an advertisement. Oh, okay. Are women more hormonally sensitive? Hormonal sensitivity has nothing to do with intuition. Women are typically very attuned to their children, so they may have a strong, certainly emotional, but that tends to induce a telepathic or more subtle connection with the children. Like my mum always knew what we were up to. It was uncanny. Right? There's 4 boys, and she was like, she could see around corners. So I think that the idea of women's intuition may be something to do with that. Women tend to be more emotionally sensitive and tuned in to what other people are feeling, that's for sure. And that goes along with that sort of telepathic sense. But it's so it's not, so hormonal sensitivity, you could say it does have a connection with that type of intuition, particularly telepathy, or sensing what other people are feeling and thinking. So yeah, there is a connection there. But overall, I don't actually. So when it comes to people, yes, I think women tend to be more intuitive for sure. But when it comes to, in other fields, men are more intuitive. It depends where you focus. But I want to play you this video because this is actually the argument for artificial intelligence being creative, and it's pretty powerful. This video was actually created by AI. So having claimed that machines can't be creative, now I'm wondering. For business, you need intuition. For politics, you need intuition. For creativity, you need intuition. For discovery, and science, you need intuition. And for intuition, what do you need? Meditation. Thank you, Ravi Shankar. So next week, our theme is the power of connection.